The new global agenda in many ways is not new. It is we had 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, in 1992, when we had the big Rio summit in Brazil, we had an agenda for the 21st century. But it is about sustainable development, and there was not enough implementation. So today, this 2030 agenda for sustainable development, in many ways, is unfinished business, but it also introduces many new things. Like the human rights issues are more strong. So we think that there is a lot of opportunity for this new global agenda to really get us moving to implement sustainable development.
Esta es una agenda, ante todo, de quien la ha aprobado, que son los gobiernos en el marco de Naciones Unidas, y también que la ha estado elaborando a lo largo de todos estos años, que es, por un lado, los propios gobiernos, las grandes empresas que han participado en esta negociación y también parte de la sociedad civil y organizaciones sociales de muy amplio rango. Por un lado, pues, organizaciones expertas en la incidencia política y que trabajan básicamente en incidir políticamente en el proceso internacional en Naciones Unidas, grandes ONGs y grandes lobbies sectoriales y sobre cambio climático, sobre sostenibilidad, sobre derechos de las mujeres, sobre derechos a la alimentación, etc. Y por otro lado, algunas otras organizaciones más pequeñas que intentan llevar algunas de las luchas que tienen en sus territorios a ese marco, que creo que tienen menos capacidad para hacerlo.
I think the agenda as it is now, it has a lot of potential. The problem will be to realize that potential, basically. There's a lot of good things in there. I think that now the international community is talking about inequalities, that they're at least addressing the structural issues behind poverty and these issues. That's good. The problem is also that the agenda has a lot of contradictions inside the agenda. And if we find a way to actually dissolve those contradictions, or to address those contradictions at least, and to strengthen those parts of the agenda that we think are really useful and meaningful, and while we sort of forget about the parts of the agenda that we don't like, or that we don't think can actually promote transformation in the world, I think then it could be a useful tool, yeah.
No, por ella misma no. Quiero decir, una agenda como esta, ¿no?, que refleja, bueno, pues un acuerdo sobre narrativas, ¿no?, sobre propuestas, pero que no tiene ningún tipo de vínculo u obligación legal, ¿no?, porque han impedido que tenga ninguna obligación legal, pues no puede cambiar el mundo por sí misma, ¿no? En todo caso, puede ser una base para bueno, pues, recordar a los gobiernos que tienen un compromiso, que sea de carácter moral, ¿no?, con la lucha contra la desigualdad, para cambiar un modelo de desarrollo que está excesivamente centrado en lo económico y no tiene en cuenta las cuestiones de sostenibilidad, pero no podemos esperar, ¿no?, que un acuerdo de ese tipo por sí solo vaya no solo a cambiar el mundo, sino ni siquiera a empezar a mover las cosas, ¿no?
I won't say that it can change the world, but it can be useful in many of the struggles which many groups are engaged with for changing the world. It has its use, but to say that it will change the world, no. But yes, to have some kind of normative language about how the inequality has to be removed, people have to have equal access to water, other kind of resources, are good normative statements which are useful when you go to different areas of struggle and say, well, this was what we promised ourselves, and if we want to have this, then we need to be able to do this. So it's useful in that sense, yes.
I hope the agenda can change the world. I'm fairly new to the discussions of it, unlike some of the other people here at the workshop. But I think aspirationally, there's a lot of amazing things in that agenda in terms of talking about poverty and the rights of women and sustainability and how those are all integrated together. How that translates into action is the biggest challenge.
There is a part of civil society that was already working very critically with existing development frameworks, with the Millennium Development Goals. Were promoting a broader development paradigm, which was looking at tax justice. It was looking at making the connections between ecological issues and fiscal policy and gender policy. And these organizations are pursuing this agenda, taking what is a good part of the Agenda 2030 and bringing that into their broader narrative. And this should continue. We shouldn't be compressed into what was a very politically negotiated field. We should continue to work with a broader development narrative, which is very much rooted in social justice and civil society, a vision of a right-based approach, and take what is good and also make people aware of all the pitfalls in the agenda. That is also an equally important part.
There is a good chance that it can change certain things in the world we live in, our communities and our countries, but only to the extent that people are really willing to work for it, only to the extent that civil society is going to push for it, and unless we combine our strength and our resolve and our determination, then probably if we don't do that, then we will be lost. I mean, nothing could change significantly over the next 15 years. But if we are really determined, if we can push, then I think we can make a difference.
By continuing to work together to retain some common criteria for understanding the strengths and weaknesses of the agenda globally, what we each do in our national levels, what we each do in our regions can be infused, with a common sense of purpose. And I think these are some of the ways in which, civil society organizations can work together. But of course, we know that among civil society organizations, there's a whole range of diversity, not simply in the issues that people focus on, but even in the entry points and ideological orientations, that people bring. And that, unfortunately, is not going to go away.
I think there should be real dialogue, participative dialogue about the things, and I think that should be one thing what NGOs should do, and the other is to mobilize people, because without support of people, without the people's movements, we can hardly expect that the politicians or businesses will change the business as usual. So I think these are roles for civil society organizations, for movements.
I think the critical issue that civil society has to confront is that engaging with the agenda is important, but there are things which are even more important. First and foremost is to join forces and support the struggle of so many people across the world to resist against the hegemonic and homogenizing form of economic globalization. And I think that resistance remains our cornerstone. But the resistance is not only resistance, because within the resistance there are new paradigms which are emerging. Thinking about agroecology, thinking about food sovereignty, different ways of envisioning societies and economies. And I think this is the energy that needs to be the driving energy of our action. If we do so, then we will probably find in the agenda elements which are instrumental to pushing that agenda forward.
I think the civil society's role is to challenge and make as well difficult questions and ask how to make that program really even better. I think that's a natural role, for civil societies. How tactically it will be, I think, I can see the civil societies which are active in the system, if you like, in the program, in the cabinet rooms, in the negotiations. But I think it's equally important to have as well strong civil society movement outside the box, outside the process, and how we can make those civil society groups to interact, if you like, so that we are in a way fighting towards the same goal. I think that's a very big challenge for us.
First, civil society is not homogeneous. You are talking about diverse and world. I think that we need to see how we can bring like-minded civil society together and in order to some already efforts is being done in different venues and at different levels with different themes. So the challenge is to be able to bring these actors from civil society who are like-minded all together and start thinking about how we can occupy our space, our right to participate in shaping the agenda. I mean, our policy space at the global level and at the regional and at the national level, and then to start shaping our strategy according to certain priorities.
It can look how governments are implementing the agenda. It can look at what systemic obstacles are there to realize the transformative potential to change the world. You know, what has to happen. If the agenda talks about inequality, civil society should look what governments are really doing about inequality. Are they really fighting inequality, or are they just giving a little bit more to the poor? Those are some important fields where civil society has a role to play.
For myself, our role as researchers is to really identify where the gaps are in being able to achieve those goals. Where do countries need to do more in laying the foundation to ensure that we can end hunger, poverty, reduce climate change? And we also need to provide information on what is the best approach to achieve those goals as well. What policies have been effective and feasible in other settings.
Esta agenda tiene muchos enemigos. Básicamente son los intereses corporativos y privados. Hemos visto, sobre todo en 2015, en todos los espacios internacionales de los cuales nuestra organización, la REBRIP, participa, que todos ellos están siendo erosionados desde el punto de vista de los intereses privados. En todos los ámbitos, en financiamiento al desarrollo, en la OMC, en el propio G20, en todas las agendas que participamos, estamos viendo esto. Y lo estamos viendo también de una forma muy agresiva en los acuerdos internacionales de comercio y en los tratados de inversiones.
You know, a lot of people are benefiting today, not just people, not necessarily individuals, but companies and certain governments or parts of governments, for example, are benefiting from the current status quo. So they don't want things to change. It is totally understandable if you seem to think you're doing very well in today's world, either through a for-profit orientation, or if you are a government that has very strong influence in the world, stronger than other governments, then you don't want a transformation of the status quo that doesn't protect that.
We work around tax avoidance and tax evasion. The problems are known. How multinationals cheat on taxes, how they shift profits from countries where they do their economic activities to countries where they don't need to pay taxes. All the mechanisms are known, but there is no concrete step taken against it. So it is already a progress to recognize what the problems are. So it is a basis for us then to ask and put pressure for the solutions to these problems which are already recognized.
Obviously, the influence of corporations are holding back many of the issues that we want to see advanced. I don't want to use the language of enemy, I would call them enemies, but they are interests, and these are interests that are they are powerful, and they stand in direct opposition to what we want. So, I mean, corporate interests certainly are the biggest hindrances to moving the agenda.
The other risk I see is that with 17 goals and no development financing, that was the outcome of Addis Ababa, there are no additional resources for development finance, that developing country governments will say, look, we cannot achieve 17 goals. There are no resources for this. So they will cherry pick the goals that they like, and probably the low-hanging fruits, goals that they've already almost achieved. And they will leave the other goals, the more transformative ones, aside, saying, look, if you don't help us achieve them, sorry, we can only do 3, 4, 5 goals and that's it.
I think the main enemies for being transformative are not necessarily people or institutions. We would say respect for the rule of law and respect for human rights is fundamental. The enemies are those that undermine that, or alternatively distract us from fulfilling on that. So I don't think it's such a black and white case because the dynamics move a lot. But where we see violations and when we see compliance not being fulfilled in terms of really genuine processes for achieving economic and social and environmental justice, that's the enemies for transformation.
The 2030 agenda is an agenda written by governments. It's not an agenda by civil society. We were consulted, we were participating in the drafting of the agenda, but governments did not take everything into account. And not all our demands are reflected in the 2030 agenda. In contrast, the 2030 agenda is contradictory. It asks for sustained growth and for sustainable development at the same time. And that's contradictory. We are very much in favor of Goal 10, asking for the reduction of inequality within and between countries. But the way they express it, the way they formulate the target related to inequality and the reduction of inequality is incomplete and is not enough in our view. So what we think is we have to use the 2030 agenda, we have to use the good parts of the 2030 agenda, and we have to really monitor the implementation of the 2030 agenda in a way that we monitor critically what the governments are doing and what they are not doing and what the obstacles are in the implementation and in the way towards a more transformative agenda.
So I think civil society has a very important role to play in the 2030 agenda. The reason I'm saying is because already now we are in the process of defining the indicators to measure the different targets and goals that are formulated in the 2030 agenda, and already now we can see that there's a risk of the goals to be watered down, to make them politically more easy for governments. And I think it's very important that civil society stands up and makes sure that we actually have indicators and processes that are able to monitor the implementation of the 2030 agenda and to make sure that really the goals are achieved that are supposed to be achieved.
Sería interesante construir una estrategia a partir de una lectura crítica para hacer un seguimiento sobre aquellos elementos nucleares de la agenda que son los que impiden el cambio social, ¿no? Por ejemplo, nosotros estamos trabajando en una herramienta para hacer este seguimiento, no en el marco de la agenda, pero sí sobre las cuestiones sobre las que se estructura esta agenda, ¿no? Es un índice de coherencia de políticas que tratamos de romper un poco con la narrativa más habitual o con la narrativa más desarrollista de la agenda, ¿no? Tratando de incorporar otra perspectiva, un enfoque de desarrollo humano sostenible, pero también un enfoque feminista, un enfoque ecologista también, ¿no? Y estamos intentando construir una herramienta de seguimiento que cambie un poco la narrativa. Yo creo que podremos intentar ampliar el marco también a través de ese ejercicio de seguimiento, hacer un ejercicio de seguimiento más político y menos técnico o tecnocrático de la agenda.